Nighttime workers of Reddit, what's the freakiest stuff you've seen on the job? I worked as an engineer in Denver, and unfortunately, doing security checks came with the job since my hours were from 2 in the afternoon to 11 at night. During rounds, we noticed the previous day that a lock on an electrical room had been removed. It was midwinter last year, and we figured someone might have been trying to stay warm. As much as I want people who are less fortunate to get by however they can, it was still my job to make sure no one was occupying any hidden spot on the property. So I went to check the room. I walked up and noticed the door was cracked ever so slightly. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside. The room was built exactly for its purpose, with no extra space at all. There was maybe slightly less than a foot between the wall and the machines in there. Thinking it would be impossible for anyone to squeeze inside, I did a quick, lazy scan and went to shut the door. As I was walking down the staircase, I heard shuffling coming from the room. It was late, nothing else was happening, and I was still fairly new to the city, so the idea of spotting an owl or a big rat was weirdly exciting. I guess I was easily entertained. I went back up, pulled out my flashlight again, and this time crouched down to check the space beneath the machines. Sure enough, I could see a pair of legs. I called out and told the person they needed to vacate. They stayed still for a long moment before finally wriggling their way out of the tight space. I waited, since procedure was to escort anyone off the property. A woman crawled out, looking rough and muttering nonsense. She was moving slowly, and it was snowing hard, so I was getting frustrated and told her to hurry. She suddenly turned toward me, stuck her tongue out with her mouth wide open, widened her stance, and pulled out a used tampon and threw it at me, hitting me on the jaw and neck. Then she scrambled off, yelling something about murdering a molester. Story 2. Not a strict nighttime job, but definitely working at night. I worked for my county morgue, retrieving bodies and bringing them in. One night, my coworker and I were talking as we were leaving the building. It was maybe 2 in the morning. I was facing him at the end of a long hallway, and he was facing me, with a giant glass door behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black mass peek out of one of the autopsy suites, and then pop back in. I looked over his shoulder, but tried to brush it off, until he said, "You saw that, right?" He had seen the same thing reflected in the glass door behind me. We walked down the hallway and found the building completely empty. When we leave, we're the ones responsible for locking up. We hightailed it out of there, both of us knowing exactly what we had just experienced. My company was a third-party contractor, so we also did other forms of body removals, including calls for funeral homes. At this particular funeral home, I had heard stories of people experiencing strange things, but I had never had anything happen to me personally. This call was around 3 in the morning. I dropped the body off in the embalming room, and when we clean our equipment, we usually spray it with disinfectant and give it a quick wipe. For whatever reason, I felt compelled to treat this body with far more care than usual. I always treated everyone with respect, but something pushed me to go above and beyond for this soul. I took extra care of him and cleaned my equipment more thoroughly than normal, even things we typically do not wash during cleanup. As I was leaving the building, walking out the door, I heard a whisper in my ear say, "Thank you." My heart dropped because I still had to turn around to lock the door behind me. No one was there, and no one lives in the funeral home. I was completely alone. I hightailed it out of there and have refused to go back alone ever since. Story 3. I used to work for a private security company about 20 years ago. Along with alarm response, we handled patrol checks and occasionally checked in on or provided backup to security guards at individual sites. One night, I was working overtime, covering a patrol route I had never done before. I knew the city well, so finding the buildings wasn't an issue. I was, however, warned about one particular building. The CEO was facing charges, and the board wanted extra overnight checks to make sure he wouldn't try anything shady. No problem. And then they added, "Oh, by the way, the building is haunted." "Sure," I said. "I'll leave Casper a coffee for you." The building itself was simple. 3 floors, stacked vertically, with a single hallway running down each level, offices on both sides, and stairwells with exits at each end. Not a big place. With paperwork included, I figured I'd be in and out in 10 minutes, tops. The first time I walked the top floor toward the front stairwell, I was shining my flashlight into various offices, noticing the ornate woodwork on the beautifully crafted paneling and the paintings of old men I didn't recognize. About 3/4 of the way down the hallway, I heard it, a chair being dragged across the carpet. I was alone in the building. I had just walked through every floor. I turned around and shone my flashlight down the hall. A chair now sat in the exact middle of the hallway, the same spot I had walked through 5 seconds earlier. If it had been there when I passed, I would have run right into it. With the hair standing on the back of my neck, I checked the nearby offices, then moved the chair back against the wall beside the end table, just outside the office door where it had originally been. I went downstairs to do the paperwork and heard shuffling upstairs again. When I stepped onto the landing where I could see the hallway at floor level, the chair was back in the middle of the hallway. Story 4. I work in security. This thread is probably too old for my one minor, still unexplained incident, but this seems like the right place for it. For a while, I was a supervisor at a site that included 2 empty buildings, technically located in the next town over, but only a 3 to 5 minute drive away. One of the buildings was never completed. It was basically a well-maintained construction site, nothing strange about it. The other building, though, had been abandoned for quite some time. It always felt off. The machinery in the electrical and mechanical rooms was old, and at night, it was loud, starting up at random with sharp bangs that would occasionally make me jump. There were also motion sensor lights with a small counter that would stay on for 5 minutes when a door was opened. Every so often, I'd walk in and find one already on, counting down with about 15 seconds left. I chalked that up to rats or something similar. But the one thing I can never explain, and it sounds ridiculous how much it scared me, happened at one of our tour points, where we had to hit a button with a wand inside a janitor's closet next to a set of bathrooms. One night, as I hit that button, I heard a toilet flush in the ladies' room. No one else was in that building. Cleaners only came about once a week during the day. I hadn't seen any vehicles for maintenance or anything like that, so I knocked on the door and yelled, "Security! Is anyone in there?" No answer. I tried again. Still nothing, so I announced that I was coming in. This was procedure if there was ever an issue in a women's restroom and you were a male guard. I opened the door and nothing. The lights were on. All the stall doors were open and no one was there. No legs under the stalls. I even checked the toilets and they weren't motion sensor activated. The building was too old. Many years later, someone offered a possible plumbing explanation, but at the time, it was genuinely unsettling. Story 5. I do a lot of long-distance running, but during winter, I have to run at night because of work. I wear plenty of high-visibility gear and a great head torch, but running through trees and wooded areas is still pretty unnerving. I really focus now, ever since an incident a couple of years ago. I was out running at around 11 at night when I suddenly heard a scream coming from the trees. A real, panicked, anguished scream. I slowed down and started to investigate because in my head, I couldn't be the person who ran past a murder in progress. As I got closer, I still couldn't see anything, but I could hear thudding and dragging sounds, twigs snapping, leaves scattering. It honestly sounded like someone wrestling in the woods. It was freezing, and I remember my breath fogging in front of me, making the beam of my torch wobble and distort. I pushed through a dense patch of bushes, and my light suddenly caught 2 pairs of reflective eyes, charging straight at me. I bolted, absolutely ran for my life, only to realize I was being chased by 2 foxes that had been fighting in the trees. That's how I learned that a fox's warning call to a rival sounds exactly like a human scream. Story 6. I worked at a hotel with a huge banquet room that could hold 300 to 400 people. It was a weeknight, and the hotel usually had a low guest count, so we kept the lights off in that area. I was walking through the room to cut across and saw the outline of a person leaning against the wall at the far end. I assumed it was another worker named Simone, since he usually hung around that area where the banquet room connects to the pool. I gave a head nod and said, "What's up?" No response. Weird, but I went on my way and left the room. I came back about 10 minutes later and saw the same shadowy outline standing against the wall. I said, "What's up?" again, and still got no reply. So I started walking toward the figure, and it became clear it wasn't Simone. I turned around and left the room, feeling weirded out that someone was just standing there in a dark banquet hall without responding. The next day, I asked Simone if he had been in the room the night before, and he said he hadn't even been working. Neither was the other pool attendant. Story 7. I worked the closing shift at a local gas station, and this happened a couple of nights ago. The evening was going smoothly. Mid-shift left a bit early to get ready for his new apartment, so I had the store to myself for about 2.5 hours. It was the usual crowd, people coming in to buy cigarettes or use the bathroom. Slow and steady. About 45 minutes before closing, everything went dead. I decided to close a little early so I could finish my paperwork and get to bed, since I didn't want to be exhausted for my doctor's appointment the next day. That's when things got strange. I noticed a guy lingering by the back door of the building on the cameras. He wasn't doing much, just standing there. Then, about 15 minutes before close, the camera showed him opening the back door from the outside. I knew for a fact the door was locked and the alarm should have gone off if it had opened without a pin. Thinking the guy was drunk, I went back there to see what was going on, but no one was there. I checked the cameras, every corner, everything. I went back to closing once I was sure no one else was in the building. It was about 5 minutes before closing when I heard what sounded like someone getting a drink in the connected subway, which closes 3 hours before we do. I walked over to the gate and called out to see if anyone was there. No answer. At that point, I started to panic. I kept thinking that if I called the police and someone was inside, they'd hear me and kill me before help arrived. I finally locked the front doors and was signing off the machines after finishing my paperwork. It was about 5 minutes past closing, and my ride was ready and waiting. I was about to clock out when the phone rang, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail since we were closed. The caller immediately hung up. The phone rang again, this time showing unknown caller. I let it go to voicemail again, and it hung up immediately. Then the phone rang a third time, now showing just unknown with no number. This time I picked up, thinking it was probably nothing, and that I could just tell them we were closed. I answered with the name of the store. There were a couple of seconds of silence, then a deep breath on the other end, followed by a single word, good, click. I ran out to the car and told my roommate, no time to explain, just go. We got home safely, and the next morning, I called to figure out what had happened. The cameras were blacked out for the last hour of the night and didn't come back on until 15 minutes after I left. The phone had no record of any of the calls, and the audio was distorted. I'm convinced I'm cursed now. My boss thinks it was just a glitch. Nothing like that has happened since. Story 8. I used to work the overnight shift at a water treatment plant that first started operating in the early 1920s. We were believed to be the oldest continuously running plant in the entire state. From 2300 to 0700, I was the only person in the building. We had plenty of security features that would alert me if anyone arrived outside normal business hours. Doors, gates, motion alarms, all of it. But with all that in place, here's what I experienced. Sounds. Many times, while sitting at my desk, I'd hear music playing softly from the next room. There was no radio, no speaker, no audio equipment of any kind that could explain it. The music always sounded old, big band or jazz, but it was too faint to make out a specific song or artist. It never happened at a consistent time, though it seemed most common between midnight and 1 in the morning. Usually, I'd get up from my desk to check it out. I'd make it almost to the doorway, and the music would just stop. The last time it happened, I stood up and heard a very clear, very close growling noise, and the music cut off before I even stepped away from the desk. Up until that point, I'd convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. When I first started the overnight shift, I would hear faint conversations between a man and a woman while standing at the sink. The sound seemed to come from the entryway behind me. I could never make out what they were saying, but the two voices were distinct. Whenever I stepped into the entryway, the conversation stopped. Since I was new to working overnight, I assumed my mind was playing tricks on me. On numerous occasions, and quite often, doors would slam shut in parts of the plant that were completely unoccupied. Some of that could be explained by pressure changes or wind, but other doors had been propped open with doorstops. Smells. There were a few instances of unexplained smells in the older sections of the plant. One night, for example, as I walked into the main entryway from the filter galleries, I noticed a distinct scent of a woman's perfume. I walked about 5 feet into the entryway and then turned back into the filter gallery. The smell had vanished. Reviewing security records and cameras confirmed I was the only person there. On 2 occasions, I encountered an odor of rot or decay while walking from the entryway to the bathroom area. The bathrooms were clean, and being alone, I can confirm the smell did not originate there. It was not a sewage odor, but resembled rotting flesh. Each time, walking through the door once or twice caused the smell to disappear. Sightings. I personally had only one unexplained sighting, again in the oldest part of the plant. I was standing outside in the parking lot when I saw a shadow move across the oldest filter gallery. It was large, darker than a normal shadow, and moved quickly. Since security was part of my job, I had to investigate. After searching from the top floor to the bottom, I confirmed that I was the only one there. The filter gallery had large windows, which is how I saw the figure, but there was no light source I could think of that would explain what I witnessed. Coworkers claimed to see figures standing in the windows on the 2nd floor, where the offices were, or on the 3rd floor, which was used for storage. I never saw anything myself, but I do not doubt their experiences, as they are not the type to play pranks. Lastly, there were several times when lights turned on or off without explanation. This happened mostly on the 3rd floor in the oldest part of the plant. During my rounds, I would look through the windows and see the lights on upstairs, but by the time I walked up to switch them off, they were already dark. Story 9. I'm a university student working on my thesis, which means there are plenty of nights when I stay way past closing time in the campus laboratory. One evening around 8, the building was completely empty except for me, a coworker, and an intern. We were bored and started teasing the intern about the lab being haunted. It was all harmless fun, right up until we heard noises coming from one of the rooms. It didn't make sense. 1. We were the only people in the building. 2. No one could have slipped past us to get into that room, and there are no windows. 3. I had been in that room earlier and personally locked it behind me. We walked toward the door, still half joking, and then all 3 of us froze. The doorknob started to turn, slowly, deliberately, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. We bolted out of the lab and got one of the campus security guards. We told him we thought someone had somehow snuck inside, and he came back with us to check it out. I unlocked the door again, pushed it open, and nothing. The room was completely empty. Story 10. I'm a hospital security officer, and the amount of strange things I see on the surveillance cameras is astounding. One night, while on rounds, I walked past the basement loading bay and noticed the door was open and the lights were off. It was 3 a.m. This door should have been locked and the lights on. I did a full check to make sure nobody was inside and checked the exterior doors. All locked. After turning the lights on, I locked the door and continued my rounds. I got back to my desk at around 3:30, and that's when I saw it. A very obvious figure, just enough of a man visible to see the top of his bald head and his eyes, staring directly into the camera from the bottom left of the screen. I did a double take because the housekeeping manager doesn't arrive until 4, but maybe he was early. So I walked back downstairs, and the loading dock door was open again. Lights off. At this point, I was practically shaking because it takes about a minute to get from my desk to the basement. There was no way anyone could have gotten in and out that fast. I turned on the lights and called out, "This is security. Make yourself known." No answer. So I did another sweep. The exterior door was still locked, but I noticed a stack of pallets sitting exactly where that man would have been standing. There was no way. For him to be where I saw him on camera, he would have had to be standing inside the pallets. So I was completely freaked out. I locked the door again and sprinted upstairs. At around 4:30, I saw the assistant housekeeping manager arrive. So I asked, "Hey, did Paul come in early today?" He gave me a strange look and said Paul was on vacation and had been for over a month. I told him what I'd seen, and we both ran down to the basement to search again, but we couldn't find anything. That was the freakiest day of my life. It still scares the hell out of me. Story 11. I worked as a bartender for about 5 years, usually getting out around 3 a.m. or 4 on weekends. One bar I worked at sat right beside a small stretch of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. It was a Saturday night. A few of my friends were hanging out with me at the bar while I finished up. I was putting away freshly cleaned glasses when I happened to look outside and noticed 2 red dots in the woods, maybe 4 inches apart and perfectly level with each other. I stared at them, trying to figure out what they were, when the 2 dots suddenly rose to about 7 feet in the air. That's when I realized they were probably eyes, because I could make out the silhouette of something crouched beneath them as it stood up. It was darker than the darkness around it, easily the blackest shape I have ever seen. Then it turned to its left and walked deeper into the woods. None of my friends saw it, and I didn't have time to point it out, so no one believed me. But I know what I saw. Story 12. Years ago, I worked for myself doing floor cleaning and waxing. A friend asked if I could do the floors in the meeting hall at his church. The church dated back to the late 1700s and was surrounded by an old cemetery. I usually arrived around 4 in the morning and finished by 6 or 7. My friend would stop by around 6:30 with an egg sandwich, and we'd have breakfast together while I wrapped up. One night, it was pouring rain with thunder and lightning. I was working and listening to music through my headphones, like I normally did. As one song ended, I suddenly heard loud banging, as if someone were moving furniture in the adjoining offices. Office cleaners had come in at the same time as me once or twice, so I assumed it was them. The noise went on for quite a while. When my friend arrived with breakfast, I told him about the sounds. He said the cleaners had been let go months earlier, and a church member handled the cleaning during the day. We walked back to the offices, and everything was exactly as it should be. That's when he mentioned there were rumors the church was haunted, though he had never experienced anything himself. That was the last time I worked there. Story 13. I arrived at work at 4:30 in the morning and saw a tall, dark figure standing in the front doorway. I ran back to my car and locked the doors. The man didn't move. I wasn't sure what to do, so I waited for the next employee to show up. We approached the front door together, both trying to figure out why someone had been standing there like a creeper. Then we realized it was because he was a vampire. Edward, I think. I worked in a restaurant, and the night shift had put up a life-sized promotional display of one of the Twilight vampires, but forgot to tell the morning crew. I'm glad I didn't call the cops, though it probably would have made the story even funnier. Story 14. I used to work overnight at Walmart, and one night I was assigned to stock automotive, the farthest corner of the store from everyone else. It happened to be one of the few times I wasn't listening to music with earbuds in, so I would have heard if anyone was nearby messing with anything. The doll aisle was only a few feet away from where I was stocking. I walked past the aisle on my way from the warehouse, and a doll at the opposite end suddenly started crying. It scared the black off me. Story 15. I worked at a 24-hour drive-through gas station, usually known for being robbed in the middle of the night. After a lucky streak of never being successfully robbed, I had thwarted 3 attempts during that time. 2 men snuck up behind a customer I was serving through the door of the booth I worked in. They grabbed him and pushed him through the open door into me. I leaned into him and tried to push back, totally squishing the guy, while desperately trying to reach the silent alarm. I failed to hit it, and we all ended up falling to the floor. The 2 men had large knives and ordered us into the back room and bathroom. They forced the customer's head into a toilet while holding a knife to the side of his neck. The other man pressed his knife into my chest and demanded that I open the large cigarette safe, which held about $25,000 worth of cigarettes. I had no access to the safe and told him so. They forced me back to the front, and I opened the register. The man completely flipped when he discovered there was only about $20 to $30 in small change. I had the cash in my pants pocket beneath my coveralls, something I shouldn't have done, but it had been busy. I told them I put all the cash in a slot that drops into a floor safe I can't open. They seemed satisfied and hurriedly filled a hockey bag with every pack of cigarettes we had on display. Once they were out of sight, I slammed the silent alarm button. The customer came out of the back room, dripping with toilet water, and obviously freaked out. I said, "That was insane." He laughed and calmed down a bit after that. We chatted until the cops arrived. Before they got there, I gave him a pack of cigarettes that the robbers had left behind. Story 16. Shout out to the worst place I've ever worked, Cold Stone. Our location was notorious for bad everything, from extreme incidents like kidnappings and murders to constant leaks and infestations. Compliance was non-existent, so we stayed in the shop until closing was completely finished. During closing hours, seeing drug dealers outside around 11 at night wasn't unusual. When taking out the trash, we usually went through the back door to the dumpsters, located about 200 meters from the door. Once it got dark, it became really dark back there. Being the only guy working there besides the boss and his son, who never stayed that late, my coworkers always asked me to go with them to the dumpsters. They didn't want to be alone, which was completely understandable. When we were completely finished, sometimes it would take us until 1 in the morning to leave the store. On one occasion, it was just me and one of the girls who worked there. We had wrapped up a long shift in the late fall. It was dark. The night was cold, but nothing unbearable. We went our separate ways toward our cars. As I was walking to mine, I heard her footsteps rushing up behind me. She grabbed onto my arm and pleaded with me to come with her to her car because someone else was there. I walked her down the road to her car. As we passed the corner of the shop, I instantly saw this person, though I never saw their face. They were dressed all in black, standing under the only streetlight, with their hands tucked in their pockets. They looked up at the 2 of us. I leaned close to the girl and whispered, "Once we get within 15 feet of your car, run and jump in. Don't stop driving until you get home." As we got close enough, she did exactly what I told her. The second she opened the door, the person started walking toward her car. She got in and drove away, just moments before they reached her vehicle. That left me alone with this mysterious figure. We stood facing each other for a few seconds, and then they turned and walked into the tree line on the other side of the parking lot. Nothing too dramatic, but it was terrifying for both of us. She quit soon after that night, but I stayed for another 1.5 years. Story 17. There were multiple strange incidents when I volunteered to teach English in rural mountain villages in Taiwan back in 2007 during the Buddhist Ghost Festival, but this one stuck out. After teaching one day, the village chieftain invited us to his house for dinner. While walking there at sunset, we passed a graveyard near the side of the road. From the graveyard, we could hear a baby crying, and it seemed to be coming from behind a headstone. When we checked, the crying stopped, and we couldn't find any trace of an adult or an infant. On our way back from the group dinner, 2 of my fellow volunteers and I heard a baby crying in that graveyard again. This time, we also smelled something intoxicatingly sweet. We went to investigate, but stopped short of entering when we saw what looked like the outline of a woman in a long dress staring at us from the woods behind the graveyard. We immediately turned and got the hell out of there. It wasn't until earlier this year that I learned about the Pontianak, Malay, Kuntilanak, Indonesian, and Chorel, Indian, when some friends from Malaysia and Indonesia were telling me folktales. Story 18. I've never been a believer in anything paranormal, ghosts, scary stories, any of that. I always thought it was all nonsense, until now. A couple of weeks ago, I started working the graveyard shift at a plant that fills cylinders with different gases, oxygen, various medical gases, welding gas, that sort of thing. During the shift, it gets very, very dark, and it's just me and two other guys. Working graveyard feels different. It's like a separate reality, a different dimension. Everything just feels off. Anyway, years and years ago, there was an accident at the plant where 2 or 3 men lost their lives because of human error. Since then, there have been major safety updates to make sure it never happens again. Outside our plant, we have a bunker where we store filled cylinders so that if one leaks, it's all contained outside. About once a week, I see people who aren't actually there, people who aren't real. Sometimes, when I'm on the forklift outside alone, moving pallets, I'll see a man standing in the bunker watching me. I'll drive over thinking it's a coworker, but no one is there. Other times, I'll see a man taking a break, leaning against the cylinders, wearing the old style uniforms, like he stepped out of an old movie. They're 2 different men, different builds, and they are 100% not my coworkers. I assume they're the ghosts or spirits of the men who died at the plant. They're calm and they don't scare me. They just seem to watch us work, take breaks, and relax. Edit. No, I am not breathing in the gases, for everyone asking. We have extremely strict safety procedures and state-of-the-art ventilation running around the clock. I wouldn't work here if I were inhaling any kind of gas. Story 19. I worked at the ArcLight, a bougie movie theater, and since I'm a night person, I usually got the last shifts. That meant I had to clear out every theater and make sure all the trash bags hidden in the back hallway were empty and ready for the morning crew. The only truly freaky experience I ever had was hearing and seeing someone running up and down the hall, laughing and acting completely bizarre. I assumed it was a drunk patron, but it went on for a good half hour, even after I called security to come escort them out. The security guards heard the constant running footsteps too, and we only ever caught quick glimpses of the back of the person. It scared the hell out of all of us. The next night, I was working another late shift and ran into one of the guards who had been there. He told me they never found the guy, and eventually the footsteps and laughing just stopped. I still don't know what to make of it, but that was the only time anything like that ever happened. Story 20. I worked the midnight shift at a crappy little gas station and saw plenty of weird stuff. There was the guy who swore he was going to hit it big on the lottery. He carried around an old baseball card album filled with his past lottery tickets, nearly 10 years worth. Every week, he had a new method for predicting the numbers, from using crystals to divine them, to dividing previous winning combinations by specific numbers. Then there was the woman who always paid in pennies for her pack of Camel-Wide non-filters, soft pack only. The meth addict who passed out in his car after buying a 44-ounce Big Gulp and a handful of those so-called energy pills. And the same guy who, about once a month, would steal a 12-pack. But since he was related to the manager, everyone just looked the other way. Story 21. A strange-looking fox. Its face literally looked like it had a pixelated skull superimposed over it. I work in an animal shelter and was out doing the morning dump checks, looking for any pets that might have been left overnight, and I had one of our resident dogs with me. The dog was completely oblivious to the fox perched on the wall across from us. I watched it for a while, half expecting the skull-like effect to disappear, the way exhaustion-induced hallucinations do. But it didn't. It shimmered in the moonlight. I eventually finished my checks and kept walking up the road, and I could still feel its eyes burning into my back. I turned around, and it was still there, watching. Where Wanishi dog finished its morning toilet, and when I turned back to head in, this thing was still staring at me. Usually foxes bolt the second they see a human, but this one didn't move. Logically, it was probably sick. Maybe some skin condition that made the fur around its face look like a skull, and it didn't run because it was dying or too weak. I'm usually not afraid of foxes, but this one genuinely terrified me. Even now, years later, I still shudder when I think about it. The only other explanation I've got, a shapeshifter. Story 22. Back in the day, I was a security guard. My job was to watch the corporate pool and park at night, way out in the boonies. Every hour, I had to walk the perimeter and key in on this clock device. It could get pretty spooky at times. One night, while walking the perimeter, I felt like something was watching me from the woods. I figured it was just my imagination, but the feeling stuck with me. On my second trip around, I heard something moving in the woods, something big. I was scared enough that I left work a couple of hours early, since no one ever checked in on me. The next day, when I reported to the main guardhouse at the factory, they asked if I had seen the cow. It turned out a cow had escaped from a nearby farm and wandered into the park. I am fairly certain I was being stalked by a dairy cow. Story 23. I've done plenty of night shift work as a process engineer and operations manager around the world. Well, if the world is Italy, China, and India. Here are a few stories. Some I've shared on Reddit before, some new. I was at a chemical plant in China, working the night shift. The plant had a chemical warehouse with pumps, storage, and what was basically an operator hangout area. One night, I was doing my rounds and walked into the room. On the ground were 3 or 4 operators lying there. In the world of chemical plants, people on the ground, Ronk's toxic gas leak, call security. Everyone's dead. So I slammed the door, ready to figure out my next move. And then I saw everyone wake up. Yep, those guys were sleeping on the job. They should have picked a better spot. Not only was it a place they shouldn't be sleeping, but they were lying on a floor probably covered in bits of spilled chemicals, acids, bases, and various ammonia-based stuff. Sigh. Another time, I was working on an Italian-run oil rig. At 2 a.m, the emergency alarm went off, and we all headed to the cafeteria. Our boat full of oil was on fire. That's bad. They made us put on life jackets and started preparing to ditch the ship, which involves strapping into a boat and being catapulted over the side of the rig. Suddenly, a very happy, oily man walked in and screamed, "We are not the Costa Concordia!" Fortunately, they were able to put out the fire. It was a relief, and I got to go home, which was nice. Another time, I was working at an oil refinery in India, doing the always fun 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. We would do actual work until around 9 every night, then mostly just mess around while making sure everything stayed stable. Well, around 2 a.m, the compressor tripped. What the hell? Great, the whole plant is down. We checked and saw there was no reason for it. No high temperature, no PDI issues, no abnormal vibration. Okay, these things happen every so often. Whatever, let's get going again. The next night, the same thing happened. This continued for about 4 days, and we were getting chewed out by Oleg, the sadistic chief, who famously berated an unmarried Indian man for being a virgin and would beat people with bamboo sticks. Really excellent human being. Luckily, we were doing commissioning work, so losing production wasn't a catastrophically huge deal, only moderately huge. If it were Starbucks, it would be the tall pumpkin latte of disasters. You know, tasty, but at least it wasn't a venti. So Piyush and I were talking and decided to point one of the security cameras at the compressor. The compressor tripped yet again. We went to the security room and convinced the guard to let us watch the footage. It was mostly boring. An oil refinery in India in the middle of the night, some lizards crawling around, a few giant flies buzzing by, and then suddenly we saw a dark figure approaching, maybe 3 feet tall, walking with a hunch. It went up to the compressor, started turning dials and pressing buttons. The compressor tripped again, and it scurried out of the area. Oh, but this wasn't some dark spirit from a no-sleep story. It was a damn monkey. The solution? They hired a local boy to sit there at night with a cricket paddle thing. Story 24. Former soldier here. I had to perform regular guard duty in rotations at different parts of the base I was stationed at. The base was known for having multiple problem areas. As part of our rotation, we patrolled or guarded various locations. One was the swimming pool, where we conducted river crossing simulations and water survival training. Another was a fairly deserted entrance to the base that faced a forested area. During our foot patrols, we regularly walked around a small lake where water-based training used to take place but had stopped due to yearly drownings, and along a forested path nearby. As part of the pool duty, our role was to ensure that no soldiers or trainees went for a late-night swim. The area was off limits for safety reasons, as there were no lifeguards and only limited medical staff on duty. The pool was equipped with huge stadium lights, which were turned off overnight, and had Olympic height diving boards used to simulate jumps into the water from helicopters. During one of my pool duties, we were in the lifeguard room overlooking the pool, quietly chatting in the dark so no one would know we were there and the soldiers could catch some sleep. Suddenly, we heard a loud splash, like the kind you hear when someone jumps from a high diving board and makes a huge impact. Following protocol, we turned on the stadium lights, which illuminated the entire area, and ran to check the pool in case someone was hurt. It's only a 5-second walk from the room to the pool, and the duty sergeant was ready to rip into whoever it was. There was nobody in the water, and it would take at least half a minute for anyone to swim from the middle of the pool. We checked the perimeter to see if someone was hiding around the pool area, but found no one. The only oddity was that the changing room and toilet lights were on. We were certain they had been off, and nobody was inside. When we checked with the warrant officer, whose job was to ensure the facility was running properly, he mentioned that this happened periodically when he was the duty officer, but they could never find anything or anyone. The other incident happened at the remote base entrance shortly after 9/11, where we typically had about 6 to 8 guys stationed overnight to make sure anyone driving in was authorized. One night, we noticed a couple of lights in the forested area, not anywhere near the road. They looked like torchlights, but they didn't project a normal beam. Instead, they moved at a fairly steady horizontal speed, but with strange, erratic motions. Thinking it was a night training exercise, we checked the training schedule and contacted Base HQ, but no such training was planned, especially not at 3 or 4 in the morning. One of the guys on duty pointed out that the lights were moving near treetop height, and at that distance, probably 2 or 3 kilometers away, they were moving far too quickly for anyone on foot. We were about to shine the guard post spotlights, including one mounted on a vehicle, toward the area and alert the base when the duty sergeant told us to ignore it, saying they were just ghost lights. The lights disappeared shortly afterward, and I never saw them again during future rotations, though others in my platoon claimed they spotted them every now and then. The last problematic area was along the footpath near the lake. Our protocol for that patrol route was that we were never to walk it alone and always had to move in pairs or trios and to get through it quickly. We were never told why. There was a particular section where the path curved into the forest, a sort of U-shaped turn, and from there, the route continued for about 600 meters in the dark, with no lights other than your L-torch. Whenever we turned into that area and walked about 50 meters or so, we always got the unsettling feeling that something was staring at us from behind, waiting to strike or jump out. Everyone who patrolled that route would hurry, sometimes outright sprint, through that stretch to reach the open area at the end, because every single one of us had felt that same thing the moment we entered that part of the path. During the day, when we checked the route, we sometimes found small, mangled birds or strange footprints along the path. In recent years, they installed surveillance cameras to monitor the area, so nobody has to patrol there anymore. That base had plenty of other strange occurrences that my platoon mates and I experienced, but these are the ones that have always stayed with me. Story 25. I used to run a small hidden bakery in Maryland. I would get there alone at 4 in the morning, and it was pretty creepy. The actual bakery, where I baked the goods, was across a small alley from the store, so I was always running back and forth to set up the shop. One day, I walked outside with a basket of cookies and saw an elderly woman approaching, holding a newspaper. She said, "Here's your paper." I took it and said thank you, and then noticed she had no shoes on, even though it was winter. She turned and started walking away. I quickly went inside, put the paper and cookies down, and went to check on her, but she was completely gone. I had only looked away for about 30 seconds. This bakery mostly got business from regular customers, all of whom I knew by name. I asked everyone about her and described her, but nobody knew who she was. I even contacted the police that morning in case she was missing or had dementia, but nothing ever came of it. In all the years I worked there, I never saw anyone else there that early in the morning, and we didn't have a newspaper delivery subscription. Story 26. I was working the overnight shift alone in a big thrift store. In the middle of cleaning, I suddenly heard carnival music. That carnival music, Entry of the Gladiators, the same tune every creepy clown movie uses. I followed the sound to the toy aisle, hearing this faint, tinny version of the song coming from somewhere in the shelves. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Total silence. I checked the entire store. No people, no footprints, no signs anyone had been inside, and I never found the toy that made the noise. Though, to be fair, I didn't exactly go digging for it. Still one of the creepiest moments I've had on the job. I used to have a video on my old phone, me slowly walking down a random aisle while that eerie carnival music plays in the background. Story 27. I used to work after hours as a help desk technician for quite a few years, and I saw and heard plenty of strange things. UFOs, weird knocking, full-on conversations where no one was actually there. Lots of high strangeness, but the weirdest incident was a lot more persistent. I'd worked with a guy named Eric for a couple of years. One night, it was time for my break, so I put myself in a code, got up, and headed outside for a cigarette. Eric came out around the same time. We talked for a minute before I headed back inside and started walking toward the restroom. We were at the far end of the building, and our desks were right by an exit. But the nearest restroom was way down a long hallway. You had to walk the entire row of desks, make a turn, and then you were there. As I'm walking down that hallway, I get the feeling someone's behind me. I ignore it at first, but right before I make the turn, I glance back. It's Eric. I don't think anything of it. Figured maybe he had to go too. I step into the restroom and expect him to follow me in any second, but he never does. Odd, but whatever. Maybe he headed somewhere else. I finish up, walk back to my desk, and sit down to clock back in. And as I'm doing that, I see Eric walking in from the exit we'd both come out of earlier, like he'd just now returned from outside and heading back to his desk. Something about the whole thing felt off, so I asked him about it. He told me he'd been outside the entire time. Our other coworkers backed him up. They would have seen him come in since our desks were right next to the exits. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I must have been mistaken, or maybe they were just messing with me. This is where it got strange. Eventually, the project we were working on wrapped up. I got moved to another team, but Eric didn't. Over the next few years, though, I kept seeing him, no matter what shift I was on. The first time was in the parking lot. I saw him walking across it, clear as day, but later found out he hadn't been scheduled to work. Another time, I walked past the break room, saw him sitting there, didn't register it at first, doubled back, and the room was empty. I'd catch glimpses of him walking past a row of cubicles, just out of reach, just long enough for my brain to say, "That's Eric," before he vanished behind a corner. It felt like seeing the ghost of someone who wasn't even dead. I've never understood it, and I still don't know why. Out of everyone I worked with, he was the one whose presence lingered like that. Story 28. I'm a nurse at a big hospital in my city. One night, I was on call during a massive snow and ice storm, so going home wasn't an option. I figured I'd just crash on the couch in the break room. It was around 3 a.m, the lights were off, and I was drifting in that weird space between being awake and asleep. The room was already pitch dark, but I swear to God I saw something darker, hovering near my feet on the other side of the couch. Just this black, floating silhouette. Nebulous. Wrong. I watched it drift toward me, and I could feel it. This overwhelming wave of anger, like seething jealousy, and pure, concentrated rage. It felt envious, like whatever it was resented me for being human. It kept coming closer, slow and deliberate, until it just rushed forward and slammed into me. I jolted awake instantly, heart racing. I've had sleep paralysis before, and I'm sure that half-awake state had something to do with it. But the fury I felt from that thing, that bitterness, I've never experienced anything like it. Even now, it still sticks with me. Story 29. I worked at an all-night diner while I was in college. One night, at about 2 a.m, a 4-year-old boy wandered in and said he was there to get some food for himself and his little sister because they were hungry. When the manager asked where his parents were, he said they were sleeping at home and that they slept a lot and often yelled at him and his sister to be quiet. It turned out he lived in an apartment complex next to the diner, and the parents were drug addicts. It was heartbreaking. Story 30. I used to work nights in a hospital setting, and for a while, I took the city bus to work. One night, a woman got off the bus and left her baby behind. Her baby. The bus driver pulled over and tried to find her, but it was nighttime and he could not locate her. He called the police, but before they arrived, the woman came running back, realizing she had forgotten something. My boss did not believe me when I explained why I was late. Story 31. I worked nights at a dog kennel, and during each shift, we would walk the dogs around the parking lot so they could go to the bathroom. The lot was surrounded by woods on most sides. A stray cat colony lived in the trees behind the parking lot, and every time I walked a dog through the area, the cats would sprint away and hide. They were terrified of the dogs. One night, I was walking a dog when I saw the cats again, but this time they were sprinting out of the woods toward me. They all gathered in the middle of the parking lot, completely ignoring the barking dog at my side. It definitely freaked me out. What was in the woods that scared the cats so much that they ran toward me and a dog they usually avoided? It was probably just a few coyotes or something, but it felt unsettling, wondering what had frightened them so badly, just out of view in the trees. Story 32. I'm a nurse, so I see a lot of freaky stuffs working days at the hospital, but I used to work nights. There's a common phenomenon among dementia patients called sundowning. A patient can be sweet and cooperative all day, but once night falls, they do a complete 180 and become agitated and sometimes hostile. And for some reason, more patients seem to decline during night shift. They often start to crash around 3 a.m. Story 33. One night during a floor set at VS, we were taking out trash, going in and out of the stockroom, cleaning the floor, removing merchandise, counting registers, opening boxes, the usual. We had music blasting, and were singing and goofing off while we worked. All of a sudden, a woman walked up to the register wanting to purchase her items, even though it had been about 45 minutes since we closed and finished our nightly routines of clearing the fitting rooms, recovering the store, and vacuuming. None of us knew she was there. None of us saw her. She wasn't in the store, the back, the bathroom, or under any tables. We think she may have been hiding in the ceiling of the dressing room, waiting for us to leave so she could rob the place. But since we weren't going anywhere, she must have decided to come out. It was genuinely terrifying. There were about 12 of us in the store that night, all in different areas, and not one of us noticed her. She could have had a weapon. She could have gone through our personal stuff, but instead, she paid for a few random items and walked out like nothing strange had happened. Story 34. Years ago, I worked the night shift as a CNA in an assisted living facility. I had a resident who went through a wild week, and she didn't have dementia or Alzheimer's, which made everything even stranger. It was around midnight when I was doing my rounds, and she burst out of her room holding her giant cross, looking white as a ghost. I asked her what was going on and if she had a bad dream. After catching her breath, she said someone had been in her room telling her to get out. We had wanderers in the facility, so I checked her room, thinking one of them might have frightened her. I found nothing. She followed me around the rest of the night and didn't go back to bed until 4 in the morning. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next night, the same thing happened. She claimed again that a man was in her room telling her to leave. I checked her room once more and found nothing. This is where things got really strange. One night, while I was in the back, helping a resident, my buzzer went off, indicating that the front door had been opened. I finished up quickly and ran to the front. Those doors are locked at night. When I came around the corner into the front office, I saw her standing outside with the door wide open, staring up at the sky in awe. I asked what she was doing since it was 2 in the morning at that point. She looked at me, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, "Death is coming for X." I had to let him in. I coaxed her back inside with a cup of decaf coffee and some biscuits. She told me again about the man in her room and how he was making it hard for her to sleep. Curiosity finally got the best of me, so I asked her if she could describe what he looked like. I really do not believe in the paranormal. I feel like everything has an explanation, but I cannot explain how she accurately described a resident who had lived in her room years earlier. He had been an angry man who never wanted to be in the facility in the first place and eventually passed away after refusing his medication. He did not like anyone in his room except a few CNAs. She even got his name right. Her family became concerned about her well-being and asked to have her moved to another room. After she was transferred down the hall, her nightmares stopped completely. I asked the other PCWs and CNAs if any of them had ever mentioned the previous resident to her. All of them said they had not. Story 35. Obligatory, not me, but my mom. She worked at a gas station, the only one open 24/7 in our tiny hometown. One night, while working, she looked out the large front window and saw 2 men, all bare, walking past the station. She stood there in shock, then called 911, though she said it was really funny. Another time, during the same shift, a woman tried to shoplift a bottle of wine and ran off. My mom's boss had been told to hit the emergency button if this happened again, so she did. She had no idea that it would bring 5 police patrol cars, lights flashing, guns drawn, the whole setup for a simple shoplifting. The police were not pleased. After that, my mom never touched that button again. Story 36. I drove a taxi for a few years after college, and since I wasn't a morning person, I chose the night shifts. Being in the city that never sleeps, working nights meant good money. One night, after dropping off a customer at a nightclub, 2 very drunk girls and a guy got in and asked me to take them to one of the boroughs. It was after midnight, so there were plenty of wasted people looking for rides home. The drive was about 35 to 40 minutes. I remember hearing them talking and laughing in the back seat as we drove across town, but I didn't pay much attention. It wasn't until I came out of the tunnel that I realized it had gotten very quiet. I checked the rearview mirror, but couldn't see anyone. I figured they must have passed out quickly. Because of the divider and yellow cabs, I couldn't see down into the back seats. The rest of the ride was silent. When I reached the destination, I turned on the interior lights and said, "We're here." I looked back and saw only the guy. He didn't respond until I called out a second time. The first thing I asked him was, "Where did the girls go?" He replied, "What girls?" I said the girls who got in with him. He insisted he was alone. It's one of those incidents that stuck with me, because I could have sworn I saw them get in and heard their giggling during the ride. Story 37. I worked a 12-hour shift from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. for a trucking company in the IT department. I was the only person on the entire upstairs floor, and after midnight, the only person in the whole building. I spent my time running between cubicles, handing out reports for the next day in near total darkness. Every once in a while, a random phone extension would start ringing. It would ring and ring and ring without stopping. I'd have to track it down and answer it, but there was never anyone on the line. It always freaked me out. I asked other operators who worked nights if they experienced the same thing, and they had. A phone company technician dismissed it as a glitch in the switching system, but it was still creepy. Story 38. I worked a night shift at a train station a few years ago. Around 2 a.m, I noticed a street lamp down the road flicker and go out. A second later, the entire room dropped into absolute darkness. Not dim, pitch black. The kind where your brain panics for a moment, and the first thing you do is tap your own chest just to make sure you're still there. The magnetic lock on the office door had died, so I could just push it open. I stepped out into the corridor and immediately heard banging. When I turned the corner, I saw the automatic doors at the station entrance opening and closing over and over again, slamming and retreating like they were stuck in a loop. The big LED departure board behind the barriers was flickering wildly, lines of light running up and down it like the old Nokia Snake game in Fast Forward, absolutely losing its mind. I went up to the control office, and the night controller just shook his head. Phone lines were down too. No one knew what the hell was going on. Walking through the station was eerie. No trains, no lights, just machinery behaving like it was possessed. After a few minutes, the doors finally stopped their spasm, and the station went dead still again. Eventually, we found out it was a massive power surge at the substation next door. When I went home at 6 a.m, the electric company and the phone company were still outside trying to fix everything. I'll never forget that night. Story 39. I wasn't really a nighttime worker, but I was the HOA president of my old condo building. Basically, after hours, all the building problems came to my doorstep. One night, I came home late, and our valet was visibly shaken, almost sheet white. We had 24/7 valet service, which at the time also did rounds around the building like security. I asked him what was wrong, thinking there had been an accident or a break-in. He asked me to sit down and watch the video cameras, then played a recording from our gym. The video starts playing, and you can see the punching bag hanging from the ceiling move ever so slightly. I asked what I was supposed to be looking for. He told me to keep watching. Then the video shows the punching bag swing a good 3 feet from side to side, as if someone were hitting it hard from both directions. This goes on for about 10 to 15 seconds. Then it stops and settles perfectly in the center again. The valet said he ran in to see what was happening. The moment he stepped 1 foot into the gym, he saw a little boy standing in the middle of the room. I watched the feed of him entering, then immediately backing out in a hurry. He called his company and quit on the spot. Our building was seriously haunted. Story 40. Back at the end of my college days, I had a full-time job at a highway rest stop on the evening shift. For clarification, a scheduling mishap meant I had only one class left to graduate, and it was only offered in the second semester, so I took the job to pay rent. Basically, I cleaned the place. Since it was the evening shift and I worked 10-hour shifts, I was there until midnight. Semi-trucks parked in the back of the building for drivers spending the night. One night in particular, there were only 2 trucks. Not the most unusual thing, but definitely fewer than usual. Being in the Midwest, the land surrounding the rest stop was unending corn. That night, I was outside changing bags in the outdoor trash barrels when I noticed a man at the back of the lot, right at the edge of the asphalt, staring into the cornfield. I thought maybe he was one of the 2 truck drivers and had chosen to relieve himself in the field instead of going all the way to the building. I went back to my trash duty and forgot about it. About 10 minutes later, all 8 trash cans were emptied, 4 in the front and 4 in the back. Plus, I had swept and cleaned the outdoor vending machine areas. By this point, there wasn't much left to do, and this was before the explosion of smartphones, back when I didn't have one. So I went outside to make sure there wasn't any trash on the ground that needed picking up, just something to do. The man was still out there, in the same spot, facing the cornfield, in what looked like the exact same position he'd been in before. He had to have finished peeing by then, so I watched him to see what he was doing. At one point, it looked like he started to turn his torso, as if he were about to look back, but then he suddenly snapped forward again, like he'd been caught staring at something he shouldn't have. I had an overactive imagination, and this rest stop was practically in the middle of nowhere, with poor cell service and no internet. So even that was enough to freak me out. I went inside and hid in the locked employee office for basically the rest of my shift. He wasn't out there when I left to go home, at least not from what I could see through the lobby windows, but I was still jumpy, walking to my car. I had no idea what he was doing. Maybe he was looking at the sky and thinking about something. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe he was on something. I really don't know. It probably would have been less scary if there had been more people around. I never saw anything that strange at that job again. Story 41. I worked at Lowe's as an early morning stalker. About halfway through May this year, I was in the back, squashing cardboard on the loading dock, when I heard a woman scream. There were 3 other people around me, and we all went into the shipping racks to see who had screamed and if anyone needed help. Our shipping racks are inside a concrete brick square with only one entrance and exit, big enough for a forklift, plus some room to move. We spent about 5 minutes searching everywhere for the person, but couldn't find anyone, so we left. As soon as we exited the racks and the dock manager went to call it in, the front end called us. They'd been hearing a woman screaming for the last 10 minutes. We all went to the front as the store manager instructed, only to start hearing the screams coming from the docks again. After this, the manager called the police, and we had to shut the store down. Search for the source of the screams. It was absolute chaos. We split into teams of 4 to 5 people to search, and everyone kept hearing the screams from different parts of the store. Many of us even captured it on camera. I personally saw at least 7 or 8 different videos where one group would hear screams in one area, but no other group or camera picked up the same sound. About halfway through this, the officers called in backup. Once they arrived, there were over 50 people searching for the screaming woman. After about an hour, the store manager closed the store completely. Only he, the back and front end managers, and the officers stayed behind, while the rest of us were sent home for the day. The next morning, when I arrived, we were all told that they never could determine what was causing the screaming. Officers were stationed in the store for a week afterward, but it never happened again. All of this occurred within a 2-hour time span. Story 42. While working mid-shift on Okinawa in the Air Force, I had a couple of pretty scary moments. Here's one of them. On Sundays, mids would come in full force. Some weeks, the aircraft we were fixing needed an end-to-end test. Mids were usually set up for this, as the test equipment was very heavy and kept in an old storage building off the flight line on the other side of the perimeter road. We checked out a bread van and drove around to the old abandoned building, backing the vehicle up to the doors we would be loading from. I was the FNG, and as I drove up, I noticed a sign in Japanese and English. It warned that the forested area between the perimeter road and this creepy storage building was a mass grave, and not to disturb it. Creepy as it was, I tried to push it out of my head as I parked. We opened the building, and it was hot and musty from a complete lack of air conditioning on a subtropical island. The place smelled like it had been forgotten for decades. We located our test equipment and started preparing it to load. The other airmen and I decided to split up to move faster, and I also wanted to explore this old storage building. Surely it wouldn't miss a few supplies. There wasn't much to find downstairs, but in the back, I discovered a narrow staircase and decided to check out the upstairs. Jackpot, old parkas from Korea, deployments, extra chemical gear, glow sticks by the dozens. I started stuffing my pockets like a sneak thief while continuing to explore the second level. I found an odd back room that was void of anything to pilfer, completely silent, and strangely free of the usual must and heat. The room was a solid 25 degrees colder than the rest of the building. Seeing nothing I could take, I thought nothing of it and left. As soon as I stepped out, I felt watched, like someone else's finger was pressed to my spine, pushing far too eagerly. I hurried downstairs and helped my fellow airman load the heavy equipment, while he berated me for taking too long to explore. He was in the back of the bread van, arranging the equipment like a game of Tetris, so we would only have to make one trip, while I loaded from outside. After the second big box was in, he walked to the back of the vehicle, where I waited, holding more equipment to load. As he approached, he walked past a large window on either side of the vehicle. Following him outside the vehicle, about 3 feet off the ground, was the specter of a pale woman whose calm expression quickly twisted into anger and hate. I felt every bit of color drain from my face. The approaching airman asked if I was about to faint, but I ignored the question as I slowly peeked around the edge of the truck. Nothing there. Just that same cold, creeping sensation running up my neck and spine. I told him we needed to finish loading as fast as possible and get out of there immediately. Later, at the smoke pit, I told him what I had seen and that I would never go back to that building again to load or unload. They could write whatever paperwork they wanted. I had been warned. I felt I had overstayed my welcome, and if I returned, that spirit would not be as lenient. They humored me, and I never went back. It has been almost a decade, and I can still see every detail of her face. Story 43. I worked in a bowling center as a night tech. Some guy had a heart attack and died during league night many years ago. The staff said the place was haunted, but I figured they were just messing around. The front-end staff had finished their tills and gone home for the night. I was setting up maintenance for the morning crew, so I hung back for about an hour on my own. We were due for our monthly bumper maintenance. The center was about 30 years old by then, so everything was run down, and we still had the old gutter bumper rails that were manually operated. I had locked out 6 lanes for the morning tech and left the bumpers out with the tools ready to go. After locking up in the back, I walked up to the front control area and turned off the lights. The whole place went pitch black. I set the alarm, and as I was standing at the entrance, there was a loud bang, as if the bumpers I had set out had slammed shut. I nearly pissed myself. I quickly locked the front doors, ran to my car, and got out of there as fast as I could. It was about 11:30 at that point. Around 1 in the morning, the manager got an alarm notification on his phone, so he rushed in to see what was going on. Someone had ripped out 2 of the 6 lanes worth of bumpers, completely destroyed them, and the tools were scattered across several lanes. There was no sign of forced entry, and all the doors were still locked. The CCTV only covered the tills, the office, and the entrances, and the footage showed no one entering or leaving after I left for the night. He did a full sweep of the building, armed with a crowbar just in case, and found nothing. Story 44. As a teenager, I worked at a fast food burger shack. My boss was a greedy, stingy a-hole who completely disregarded worker safety laws and insisted we work 24-hour shifts to accommodate as many customers as humanly possible. It was just me and the fry cook on shift. He was a really naive kid, kind of a square. I told him a story about the hash-slinging slasher, an undead figure with a spatula for a hand. In the version I told him, he was a fry cook who died after being run over by a bus and was fired at his own funeral. His presence, I said, was signaled by flickering lights, a ringing phone with no one on the other end, and a bus pulling up in front of the restaurant to drop off his ghostly figure. Suffice it to say, I had scared my poor coworker absolutely senseless. I, on the other hand, was pretty proud of the little tale I had spun, at least until the lights flickered, the phone rang, and a bus pulled up in front of the store. Now I was scared. A silhouette emerged from the fog and started walking toward us. He looked like he had a spatula for a hand. My coworker and I grabbed each other as the figure approached, bracing for certain death. Then the man stepped into the light and introduced himself. He was simply there to apply for a job as a fry cook. He explained that he had called earlier to apply but got nervous and hung up. The flickering lights, just a poster of Count Orlok from the 1922 silent horror film Nosferatu. It was the strangest night of my life. True story. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.